Salutations everyone, Shadowtaurus here back with another power scaling videos for you guys to enjoy. And I told you guys, if my Could Aang Survive the Legend of Korra did well, then I would make its counterpart. So here we are. Could Korra from the Legend of Korra survive Aang's villains from the Avatar Last Airbender series? But before we get into the video proper, I need you all to hit that like button, comment your thoughts down below, and subscribe to the channel. Also, click the notification bell to know when I upload. Finally, you can join my Patreon or my YouTube membership program to see videos early like this one, along with getting other cool rewards, like a private Discord. Now, like in the Aang video, we'll be taking a look at Korra at the end of her respective series, this being Korra during the time after Season 4. And since I did not use the comics for the Aang video, we will also not be using the comics here, but I don't believe the current comic gives her any new scaling. Now, let's discuss who we're putting Korra up against. Now, in Avatar, unlike Legend of Korra, there are technically more villains in Avatar, and not just one per season. So obviously, she's not going to be fighting those pirate guys Zuko's teamed up with, or the Dai Li agents. So then, who will we be discussing? Well, we'll be discussing the main three villains, that being Season 1/Season 2 Zuko, Azula, and then Fire Lord Ozai. Now, for Ozai, we will specifically be taking him during his time of Sozin's Comet. And while I could touch on Ozai without the comet, I don't believe it would really change how I feel about that matchup. As for Korra, she will not be allowed to use the Avatar state in this video. That is because if she uses the Avatar state, it's a guaranteed victory, and I just want to see how base Korra is capable of dealing with these villains. So with that out of the way, let's start with Zuko. Now, Korra versus Zuko during Season 1 and 2 is, well, kind of a slaughter. The level Korra is at by the time of the end of Season 4 is well above anything Zuko has shown, as all the master level benders tended to bulldoze him. The only time he was on the winning side was when he teamed up with Azula and was backed by at least a dozen Dai Li agents against only Katara and Aang. But then how strong is Zuko during this time period? Well, a weaker Zuko was able to defeat Katara, but she also at the time could not beat a master waterbender, so that doesn't really work. And he also could never really land any good hits on Aang, even when he was a master. So it's incredibly difficult to say if he could last any amount of time against Season 4 Korra. So it's very safe to say that Korra wins round 1. Now, when it comes to Azula versus Korra, however, it's not very clear cut. Azula is incredibly skilled when it comes to combat. Azula is not only just an incredible firebending prodigy, but she's also a perfectionist, meaning she trains incredibly hard to improve her skills. Not to mention the fact that she has Lightning Generation, which will most likely one-shot Korra, as Korra doesn't know how to redirect lightning as far as we know. And if you'll remember, Azula was even able to tag and press Aang, who is an airbender, and they're known for their evasion and agility. But then let's talk about some of Korra's advantage in the fight. Firstly, she's considered a master firebender in her own right. At the start of the series, she actually was passing her last firebending trial and was considered a master of the element by the White Lotus members observing her, meaning she already has a good way to deal with most of Azula's fire-based attacks. As well, she is arguably a more skilled bender than Aang at this point due to her having mastery over both earth and water at the beginning of her series. So she has far more options available to her against Azula. And don't forget, she also has airbending too. And while she's not a master of it like Aang, she is still incredibly light on her feet from what we see of all of her fights. Overall, I do think Korra has a great shot of winning against Azula, but I also think Azula has her own ways of winning as well. Now, I didn't bring up Korra's metal bending as I'm unsure if it would play a significant role in the fight. Metal bending isn't something Korra uses combatively often, and also she's not the best at it from what we can see. But I do definitely think if there's metal around, she'll definitely use it. Overall, I think Korra can definitely win this fight, but it's not going to be an easy fight. Most likely high difficulty. Mid difficulty if you really want to give Korra benefit of the doubt and believe she's just that much above Azula. But her next opponent, oh, this is tough. Now, when it comes to Korra versus Ozai, this is a very interesting fight. And suffice to say, Korra is going to struggle heavily in this fight. Ozai was stated by the creators to be the strongest firebender in the world, which would not only scale above Azula and all of the different firebending masters in the world at the time, like Zhang, but it would also scale him above Iroh. Alongside the enhancements of Sozin's Comet, Korra is going to be hard pressed to actually beat him. let's actually give Ozai the credit he deserves real quick. Ozai in his fight with Aang was able to press Aang incredibly. Despite him being a master airbender, Aang was struggling to dodge Ozai and launch any real counteroffensive. So for those who say Ozai is actually a weak villain, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Now, that's not to say she doesn't have her win cons, as Korra would get a buff from Sozin's Comet, but this fight is really where her fighting style would bring very different results than Aang's. You see, Korra is a much more proactive fighter. She hates playing defensive and will go on the offensive much more than defensive. We see this countless times. This is actually why she struggled so much to learn airbending at first. So because of this, I see her facing Ozai head on, and this would actually be to Ozai's benefit. This is because Ozai thrives in head-to-head combat clashes, as the Fire Nation at this time made Agni Kais a regular thing, where duelists would duel head-to-head until the first burn. This would mean Ozai, unlike Korra, has a lot more experience in head-to-head fights, whereas Korra, respectively, grew up in a more peaceful time, less fighting happening. Now, that does not mean Korra does not have her fair share of head-to-head brawls, but she wouldn't have the same level of experience as Ozai would. So this means Korra is going to have a much harder time fighting Ozai than Aang did. But does this mean Korra would actually lose? Well, not entirely. You can't forget that she's the Avatar and has access to all 4 elements, 3 of which she is a master of. She still has far more versatility than Ozai, and would be capable of flight during Sozin's Comet like Ozai, so it's never clear cut. But all that to say is that Korra might not be able to win this fight just because of how she fights plays right into what Ozai is used to. So for Korra, I would say beating Ozai would be a high to potentially extreme diff fight. And while she can definitely win, it will not be easy. But hey, that's just my opinion. Remember to like the video, comment your thoughts down below, and subscribe to the channel. Until we meet again, good luck in your power scaling endeavors.